Evacuate now. If you can hear this message, evacuate now.
On December 25th, the year 2020, a bomb was detonated on this spot right here on 2nd Avenue in Nashville. It killed a couple of restaurants and some very crucial AT&T network switching equipment, which turned out to be the single failure point for nearly all internet services for about 20,000 square miles. Almost anything that depended on the internet was broken. Credit card processing, cell phone, text and voice, 911 calls, some airport and hospital services. It wasn't just AT&T services. Verizon wireless towers, for example, use AT&T fiber for their backhaul, like a lot of people, so it was a very comprehensive failure. There were a whole bunch of people in town for Christmas who found out that they could not buy gas, they could not contact their friends and family about their travel plans, and they could not even open Google Maps to get directions back home. They needed a number of alternatives, and the first was probably maps and navigation. I think the lesson here is simple. AT&T has a lot of redundancies in their systems. They got battery backups, they got generators, but if you cannot trust the service to work no matter what, then the responsibility falls on you to have a backup plan as well. So in this video, we're going to talk about some GPS devices that are worth having and some scenarios in which you might need them, and the GPS system in general, which means we're going to do a little bit of GPS jamming and some spoofing, and we're going to talk about the weaknesses of the system. GPS is now kind of a confused term. People use it to refer to all kinds of geolocation data, all kinds of tracking, all kinds of surveillance, to the point where when I post pictures of a Garmin GPS device on Instagram, people will post something like, oh, now the Garmin can track you, which is a very dumb thing to post on the internet from a phone on a platform that reports directly to the government. So we'll talk more about tracking and surveillance in a little bit. But also, there are a whole bunch of different satellite navigation systems out there. Europe has Galileo, Russia has GLONASS, China has Baidu and XNSS, but we're primarily going to talk about the American GPS system, which is run by the US Air Force, by the way. It has about 30 satellites orbiting the Earth at a height of over 12,500 miles. Each satellite is broadcasting its name, its location, and a very accurate time signature, which we can use to figure out our exact location on Earth. Now, I always thought that this used triangulation to work, but that's not actually correct. Triangulation is when you find the location of a point by figuring out the angles from two other points or receivers. GPS uses trilateration, which is the latency between several points. That super accurate GPS clock signal, which is within 30 nanoseconds of all the other GPS clocks, lets us know how far we are from each satellite. So, if you knew that you were exactly 15,000 miles away from this point, you could be anywhere along this ring. If you knew that you were 15,000 miles away from this point, then you could be in one of two locations. If you had a third point of reference, you could figure out exactly where you are on a two-dimensional plane. However, because the Earth is not two-dimensional, sorry flat earthers, and we want a high degree of accuracy for our GPS coordinates, GPS receivers need at least 4 satellites worth of data before they can calculate our exact position in 3-dimensional space. It's actually simpler than you might think. All it takes is this tiny antenna to pick up the data being transmitted by the satellites, and then this tiny chip right here can do the math. It's just a simple equation that compares the latency between the signals, and boom, you get your exact coordinates. This $2 chip does not need to ask Siri, it doesn't need to ask Google, it doesn't need to access Amazon servers or load any Facebook ads in order for it to work. It just needs a tiny bit of battery power and the ability to listen in to the radio signals that are blanketing the entire globe right now, and it can tell you exactly where it is. This is the same kind of GPS chip that your phone has, but the phone brings with it a whole bunch of new security weaknesses and dependencies. Google Maps will use these GPS coordinates, but it also wants more data from you and more data from the internet before it will do anything useful. That's why we're talking about devices that are a little bit more resilient and self-sufficient. Devices that are not dependent on cell towers and fiber lines and switching stations and server farms to work. There's a lot of scenarios in which these devices are really handy. Scenario 1, we're going on a road trip. I actually just did this a couple of weeks ago, and I used Google Maps on my phone for most of the directions, finding gas, finding food, stuff like that. But I had this Garmin device with me as a backup, just in case something happened to the phone, the cell phone towers, the internet. Also, I don't know who needs to hear this, but there are parts of Kansas with no cell phone coverage. So this is the Garmin GPS Map66. In addition to having a great GPS receiver, it also has great map data for the entire continent of North America. That means all the roads, all the points of interest like gas stations, restaurants, hotels, etc. It has every street address and a lot more. It can do turn-by-turn navigation, just like your phone, without the voice prompts. And Garmin does make some driving units, even some that are specific to truck drivers and RV, things like that. But this is a little bit more versatile. It's a great handheld, pretty much indestructible, 40 hours of constant direction providing battery life, which you can stretch out for hundreds of hours if you use it kind of carefully and intermittently, especially off-road. Recharges over a USB, and it has a lot of those great off-road features like a good compass, a halfway decent barometric altimeter, and the map data has a bunch of trails, it has topographical contour lines, and you can download satellite imagery on this device over Wi-Fi, which means we could stop at that McDonald's over there, we could use their Wi-Fi to download satellite imagery on this device with no phone or computer needed, which is possibly the easiest way to get offline satellite imagery on any device. Definitely the easiest way to get it on a non-phone device. No question about that. Now, one downside is that this has a pretty small screen and is not a touchscreen. You have to use these buttons and this little four-way D-pad to navigate, which is fine for a lot of normal road trip usage. But you should also remember these buttons are what makes this thing really, really tough and rugged. You can use this thing with gloves on, in the rain, even underwater if you want. But it's not a great interface for, say, really serious road trip planning. If you were setting up a whole bunch of different waypoints and routes for an upcoming vacation, this interface, very cramped. But fortunately, it has a very cool trick up its sleeve. This thing is not only a GPS receiver and a map viewer, it's also a map server. You can plug this thing into a computer with the USB cable, and then you can install a program called Garmin Basecamp. In fact, the first thing you should do when you buy a device like this is immediately put the Basecamp installer on the internal memory, so you can install Basecamp on any computer without internet. And then Basecamp becomes the new interface for this GPS device. And you can use your nice big computer screen for all of your route planning and your setup. You can see all of this device's map data in three-dimensional space. You can graph elevation, you can search, you can write notes, all with a proper mouse and keyboard, and everything that you do gets saved onto this device or onto the computer or both. And again, it all works with the maps that are stored on this device. It does not need any internet to work until you want to download more satellite imagery from the Garmin servers. But this way you can do all of your offline geospatial research and planning. You can set up all your vacation waypoints, the infill routes, the vacation resupply points and rendezvous points, your various vacation activity zones. It's just basic vacation procedure. Scenario 2, our vacation has gone bad. Repeat, our vacation has gone bad. We're now gonna exfil the vacation area off-road. We could use the GPS Map66, but I actually wanna use the eTrex 32X, which is the little brother. This thing has the exact same map, whole continent, same roads, same contour lines, same points of interest, same turn-by-turn navigation. It just doesn't have the satellite imagery. There's technically a way you can trick it into having the satellite imagery on here and loading it, but it's very flaky. It's totally not worth it. However, it does have the same USB features as the bigger handheld, so we can plug it into the computer and use Basecamp. And earlier, I copied all of our planning data from this over to this, so all the same waypoints, all the same routes, they all have the same names. We're all synced up now. And These things can also transfer data wirelessly. No computer as long as they're within about 10 feet of each other, which is cool, but I have to admit I've never needed that in real life. Now, I have used an eTrex 32 a lot in real life, the earlier model. If you're a cynical person, you might assume I'm only shilling these Garmin devices because T.REX Arms just started selling them. But no, we're selling these because we really like them. I've been using an eTrex handheld for almost, no, more than 10 years. It's been all over the world with me, and it's still working just fine. And it still has, like all the Garmin devices, a micro SD slot so that if you're going to Africa, you can load up a new continent's worth of maps and you're good to go. I will say the new model is better because it is smaller, it's lighter, it's a little more power efficient. 2 AA batteries gets you about 25 hours battery life. And your phone probably lasts about 25 hours as well, but that's turning the screen off, letting it go into sleep mode for most of the day. This thing gets 25 hours of screen on, GPS on, calculating routes, recording tracks. That's really, really good. And since we're now moving slower on foot, we don't need constant GPS. We can make these 2 AA batteries last for days. And, you know, AA batteries not hard to find. Now, part of the reason that these devices get such good battery life is the simplicity of the design and the circuitry, but a lot of it is the screen. In an age of 120 hertz, 4K OLED phone screens, this looks pretty sad on paper. Very limited colors, terrible resolution. I wouldn't call this vibrant, but it is fantastically readable in direct sunlight, and it draws almost no battery power at all until you turn on the backlight. And even in the dark, if you're navigating with this thing using night vision, you can probably read this with no backlight, just the ambient light, possibly a tiny IR map light. I've tested this and some of the other map devices for light emissions with visible light cameras and infrared cameras. That's in a previous video that you can check out if you're interested. But this display technology here really comes into its own on smaller devices that need to be really, really, really power efficient, like GPS watches. Scenario 3, we're doing some long-range hiking and land navigation. As you know, the most important skill to develop in land navigation is terrain association. Looking at the terrain features on the map and the terrain in real life and figuring out where you are. The problem is that here in Tennessee, you can't really see any of the terrain. It's better now with some of the leaves falling than before, but in the summer, it's a jungle out here, which is where the Foretrex 601 comes in handy, because it can give you your exact location and coordinates really quickly and easily. And also your heading and your pace, even though there are no maps on board this device. It's a very military style device. It has a night vision compatible backlight. It runs on AAA batteries, and you can use it to get your location or navigate to saved waypoints, which you can copy from your computer using Basecamp, like all of our vacation points that we saved earlier, can be saved onto here, but it's not a very good standalone device. It really needs to be paired with proper paper maps. Just like the Instinct watch, which is a lot like the Foretrex, but it is a much more wearable EDC style watch. And while the Foretrex used to beat the Instinct on battery life, the Instinct 2 is way more power efficient. An Apple or Samsung watch might last for a day, maybe 2 if you keep the screen off most of the time. This thing lasts for 3 or 4 weeks easy. And if you turn off all the radios and the sensors, you can get 2 months of battery life with the screen always on. And there is now a version with solar panels, so it can run indefinitely, even though it has a full suite of smartwatch tools that use Bluetooth data, and fitness watch tools like a heart rate sensor, pulse oximeter, thermometer. You can do step tracking and sleep tracking and recovery tracking. It's just all kinds of stuff. And I'm not really going to get into all of those features here in this video, partly because fitness is not really my strength, obviously, but also because there are a ton of people who have reviewed these watches as fitness trackers, and they describe in a lot of detail how they use them to log all of their performance metrics over like marathons and things. So yeah, I will say there's not that many videos that talk about using these as practical land nav tools, even though there's a lot that you can do with them. You can get your grid location with a single button press and see multiple coordinate systems at the same time, and there are gazillions of coordinate systems to choose from. You can use the compass to keep an eye on your heading as you go. You can track your waypoints, you can save waypoints, you can go backwards along your breadcrumbs, or you can just use the GPS fix very sporadically to check your progress on your paper map, because again, there is no map data on the Instinct series of watches. Now, Garmin does make watches that have and display map data, but they're just not as useful out here as I had hoped. The contour lines on the watches are few and far between. They're just not enough to really give you a lot of terrain data. However, they're a lot more useful in an urban environment. Scenario 4, we're just walking around a strange city, minding our own business, and we're using the Phoenix watch here for basic spatial awareness. We got the street names on here. Turn-by-turn navigation actually works surprisingly well, especially with the vibration thing. It's surprisingly useful on this teeny tiny screen. But what's more useful here, I would say, on this watch, or well, kind of any GPS handheld, is the ability to navigate while retaining some privacy. There's no reporting to servers, there's no radio transmissions, just passive GPS reception. Receive only. Now, even phones that have offline maps on them are going to try to connect. Even in airplane mode, your phone is going to try to turn on Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, or maybe even ping some cell phone towers to get improved location accuracy. And even if you disable all of that, all your location data is being stored for later. It's going to get uploaded to various servers for the purpose of product improvement, which is kind of creepy because in the Google ecosystem, you're the product. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't have a phone or that you shouldn't have offline maps on it. Osmond Plus is the best. You should go download that right now, by the way. However, unless you take serious measures to completely de-Google your phone, which is a thing that we can talk about later, if your phone connects to the internet, your location data is going to get uploaded to the cloud and it is going to get used. For more information on how your personal location data is getting used and how far it goes, I recommend that you look up the Fog Reveal service. Don't worry, it's perfectly safe to do that. It's okay for you to Google Fog Reveal because Fog Reveal has already Googled you. Scenario 5, we're at war. We're in the middle of a
North Korean
land invasion. Can your phone be trusted in the midst of
North Korean
hostile electronic warfare tools? Nope, it cannot. The only thing worse than Google is
North Korea.
These passive GPS devices are a lot safer, but jamming and spoofing must be expected. GPS jamming is extremely common today, even outside of war zones. If you go to gpsjam.org, you can actually see, day by day, a growing prevalence of GPS jamming in the world, usually in the places where you would probably expect it. And as hostile, or as I like to call it, interesting drone use increases, GPS spoofing is only going to increase as an anti-drone technique because it's just way easier to mess with weak, unencrypted GPS signals than the much stronger drone control signals. In fact, it is so easy that we are going to spoof some GPS signals right now. Before we get started, I will state for the record that we are in the middle of nowhere. We're going to use really, really low power. We're not going to interfere with anyone at all. This is for educational purposes only. We're on a closed course with a professional driver, etc., etc., etc. And also, this requires a super expensive and rare piece of equipment that is very hard to come by. Just kidding. This thing costs $200 and it is readily available on eBay, pretty much always in stock. So this device has a huge amount of fascinating receive capability. And it also has some very interesting transmit capabilities. So let me just go into my GPS simulator here and open a file which I created earlier. So this is our current location. This is accurate, this is correct. Bunch of satellites here. And then if I come over here and start transmitting my fake one, oh yeah, we just lost a bunch of satellites. Now we should start picking up my fake satellites coming from this thing. Lost satellite reception. It can't understand data from American satellites anymore. So these satellites down here are on the other side of the world for the most part. It should not be seeing these. There we go. It got it. So, gentlemen, take off your hats. According to this GPS device, we are now inside of Westminster Abbey. Now, the reason this worked so well is that the satellites that we are trying to spoof are more than 12,000 miles away, and none of them has a transmitter that is more than 50 watts, which is not very much. There are trucks on that road over there with CB radios more than 50 watts of power. So a very small amount of power, very, very close to the device, is all that is required to fool this into listening to the wrong satellites. Now, we can make the spoofing job a little bit harder with these devices. Every modern Garmin GPS device has the ability to connect to multiple navigational satellite networks. So GLONASS, Galileo, QNOS, well, all the others. I usually turn these off to save battery and just run the regular GPS mode because I don't really need the increased accuracy when I'm out here. I'm usually not in Nashville where those extra systems give me some advantage. But if I turn them back on, now my simple spoofing setup does not work. This device is now hearing fake signals from my GPS simulated satellites and real signals from real Galileo satellites, and they will not reconcile. So no location fix is possible. If I needed to spoof multiple satellite systems, I would need a more sophisticated attack than this, or at the very least more of these porta packs. The easiest way to do that would actually be to jam everything that's hard to spoof and then simulate the fake satellites that are easy to spoof. That would probably do it. And that's probably what happened a few years ago when Iran used some spoofing technology to commandeer and capture a US military drone. Our GPS satellites transmit two separate signals, one that is open and unencrypted and in the clear for civilian devices, and another one that is highly encrypted for military receivers only, which would be really, really hard to simulate. But if you jam the military channels, then most military GPS units will just switch over to the unencrypted signal as a backup, and well, that's way less secure. So unsecure that when Pokemon Go was really popular, some people were using GPS spoofing to catch rare Pokemans. The good news is that you are smarter than Pokemon Go, you're smarter than military drone, you're smarter than this GPS unit. You know that you are not in Westminster Abbey right now. If you are, you should turn off your phone. You should have some physical maps. You should be looking at the terrain. You should be paying attention to weird GPS glitches because as time goes on and things get weirder, GPS signals will become much more suspect. Scenario 6, things have gotten very weird. We've now entered a total George Miller/Romero apocalypse. Survivors are searching the blasted ruins for strange vehicles to convert into zombie-slaying war rigs. Now, you might assume that since GPS satellites last for about 10 years and zombies can't get into space, that the GPS navigational system will still be in operation, ready to guide our battle wagons into combat. Unfortunately, though, there's a lot of drift in the system, both in space but also in time. So the satellites need constant corrections and input from ground stations to keep the clocks in sync and their locations updated. Usually, they require daily corrections so that things are really tight. And without that, things get loose and then the errors add up really fast. Fortunately, a functioning GPS system is of very high importance to military operations and a lot of military equipment. So a lot of effort will be put into keeping those ground stations, which are spread all over the world, by the way, fully armed and operational. Now, there's a lot more redundancy in the GPS network than in the internet network, so, you know, it's probably still around at this stage. However, even if the satellites are down or messed up or potentially switched into encrypted military traffic-only mode, these devices still contain hugely detailed map databases with a variety of tools. Even without my computer, I can search for anything on here, I can route anywhere, I can plot elevation and travel speeds, and I have the whole continent on here. Now, I love paper maps, like this $25 Tennessee Atlas right here, but it has some limitations. It has basically all the roads in the whole state, but not all the road names, and it doesn't have too many businesses or landmarks, and it's big and heavy. If I bought the other 49 Atlases just so I could have the whole country, it would be over $1,000 and way too much weight to carry around in this sort of scenario, and it still would not cover Mexico or Canada. I'm not sure how likely it is that I need detailed road maps of Saskatchewan, but considering how bonkers this scenario has already gotten, it's probably our next stop. Now, a lot of these scenarios are extremely unlikely. Zombies, North Korea invading, but in real life, today, there are a lot of bad actors who know that our existing infrastructure is extremely fragile. If you cannot guarantee that your current device will give you the capabilities that you need, it is your responsibility to figure out how to maintain those capabilities to take care of yourself and others. Navigation and spatial awareness are important enough that you need to have backups for these things. And I'm not saying you have to have Garmin devices to do it. You could have offline maps saved on your phone, and you should. You could have paper maps and compasses, and you should. The main point of this video is that you need some redundancy in this area, and fortunately, it's not too difficult to have that. If you're going to need the ability to go home, find people, find resources, help others, you're going to need to navigate, to figure out the tools that will enable you to do that, regardless of external services and support. Essentially, you must become less fragile than the system. That's it. But obviously, there's a lot of companies that make GPS devices, but part of the reason we prefer Garmin is they make a lot of different stuff. Not just handhelds and watches, but also things like avionics for airplanes, heads-up displays for helicopters, sonar and radar and autopilot systems for boats, and all that stuff talks to other Garmin devices in the whole ecosystem, which is extremely cool. They also make a laser rangefinder for a crossbow, which has a ballistic calculator in it, obviously, but it also lets you laze targets, and those appear as dropped pins on your devices, even your watch. Which means that the CEO of Garmin is almost certainly the Batman.